This is the Look Ahead on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Scott Seidenberg back here with you. This is the Look Ahead on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Always on Twitter at Scott's On Air, SCOTTSONAIR. My next guest you can find on Twitter at real_Fats. He is Steve Diano, the man they call Fats. And Steve, thanks so much for giving us some time here on VSiN. Really great to talk to you. I want to start off with your background. How long have you been professionally betting? When did you get started? And just your evolution here as a professional gambler.
Well, to try and make it quick. I got started in high school just betting. I had a friend whose father was a bookie, so and a neighbor who used to bet with people. So I kind of developed my interest there. And as time went on, I went to college. I had a bookie there I was referred to. And I kind of got a feel for, how to get a little bit of an edge. And the big thing back then was trying to find a middle. See if you could get multiple bookmakers and find a middle. And in 1980 or summer 88, I decided I was taking a cross country trip to see all the ballparks. And I had a comp room in Vegas through somebody I knew who was the manager of the sports book. And I was talking to him and I said, can you get a lot of, because I would look at the opening line sheet and I said, really, those lines were there at some point? And they'd be like, yeah. And I was like, wow, you could bet between there and the bookies back home, you could probably middle. So he said, of course you could. So I devised this totally ill-advised plan that I was going to move to Vegas for 3 months from college basketball season, from January 89 through the college basketball. And with a bankroll of about $5,000 or $6,000, I thought I was going to be middling games between Vegas and my bookmakers back east. And, well, I mean, mathematically, when you go back and think about it, that was a pretty dumb idea because I wouldn't have had enough. Like if I won 1 week, one word, I wouldn't have had the flexibility of bankroll to pull it off. So, but as I was going out there, a bookmaker I was betting with locally said, hey, we got a guy out in Vegas that bets for us. And I didn't know what that meant. And so I got introduced to the guy, and he worked for this guy who was a businessman back where I lived. And so instead of doing what I was going to do, I became a runner for them for a couple of months. And then the guy who was running that group out there, he really didn't want to do it anymore. And then I kind of took over his spot. And then I was running that crew of a couple runners out there for a few months. And then once I was doing that, I really had like a whole grasp of the whole town. And I was an established crew out there, and that held on until, I met, then 1992 was Billy Walters' computer trial. Mm-hmm. And that was going to be that was like a landmark trial in gambling, because if he lost, he was being charged with being a bettor. And if they lost the computer trial, then it was a matter of everything we're doing is illegal. And if they won, then everything we're doing is okay. So the businessman said, all right, you be at that trial every day, take note. And I have a notebook filled. It's got all the notes from the trial every day. Wow. I sat in the first row right behind Billy Walters. I have a packet of all the newspaper articles that were printed every day from that trial. And then through that trial, I got to meet Billy because I was sitting behind him every day, and eventually introduced him to the businessman. And then they started doing some business. And then the businessman had taken on a new partner, and they wanted to cut back on the Vegas expenses. And that gave me an opportunity. Billy scooped me up in a second. I went to work for Billy 1 year, which was like the last piece of education I really needed.
Sure.
And at the end of that year, Billy wanted offered me less than what he offered me the year before, and I said, no, I'm not taking a pay cut. I said, I'll just go on my own, and that's what I did.
Well, it's incredibly interesting. And yes, the last piece of education you needed from the legendary Billy Walters. And, when you talk about working with groups and we know like that, the history of that here in town and how, certain syndicates still involved and in betting certain numbers and manipulating certain numbers. How important is that to the sports betting game? Like the difference between originators and movers?
Um, well, obviously the originators have the information first. The movers, it depends where they are on the pecking order, how fast they're getting the information. One of the things that I did when I first started on my own, because I wasn't in a position to be betting 10, 20,000 a game, but we were always trained if we had something worth betting, you bet it for the limit. So let's say I would go into a casino and the line would be there would be a 7 and the game was kind of 6.5 out there, and I could take the 7 and it was good for, let's say it was good for 5 dimes, but I only wanted to bet 2 dimes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't going to bet 2 dimes and let them move it. I just have to bet it for 5 dimes. But what I did was, what most people would do is they would bet it for the 5 dimes and then they would just try and buy it back or something like that. What I did, I didn't care if I bought it back because I knew that was the side I'd want to go in on. What I did instead was I would talk to the very sharp people that I know and say, hey, I got a little extra +7 on this game. You want a nickel or a dime? And you give out little nickel dime trinkets to everybody, and now you're kind of on the inside. And when you need information or something like that, you always can get it. And that's how I built up all my information, just from helping people, just giving out little good bet trinkets, you could call them.
Absolutely. Has that become easier now with all the information that's out, being able to shop around from book to book to find those numbers?
Yes and no. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, because some of the obviously, if you're getting too many good numbers, places will shut you. These U.S. books will just shut you down and cut you down to nothing. But you had mentioned my mantra earlier, but I also have another mantra that really kind of explains the industry pretty good. And I like to say, in this industry, it's not what you know or who you know. It's what who you know knows.
I like that a lot, because it's building up your network and then going off of that network's information, right?
And that's what it comes down to. It's the people you know. It's what they know that's the key, not so much what you know. I mean, you have your own skill sets, but what who you know knows.
Yes, so it's important to then team up and be able to share that information in order to maximize your success, because going at it alone, frankly, you're not going to have the same type of success.
No, not. I mean, not. I mean, if you're going straight for CLV and just trying to beat the numbers, I mean, you can have that success. But when you know all these people, you're going to get get CLV beaten a lot easier, because you're going to kind of be on the front end of a lot of information.
Does that info work the other way as well? Like if you're on a side but you find out somebody's on the opposite, will you buy off of it? Does it change your view based on somebody else's information?
Certainly. And now, also, it always depends on the information. I mean, if I have a piece of information why I originally bet it that I'm pretty sure the people betting the other side don't have, then I might be likely to stick with it. But generally, over the course of time, if you have opposition when you're playing, it's usually a good idea to just kind of bail and be even and just reevaluate. We used to have this used to happen all the time. Some of the big offshore books, it would take like 10, 15,000, let's say 10,000 a pop. You would call them up and you'd say, give them your account number. And then you say, what's the line on Pittsburgh? And they say 4. give me Pittsburgh -4 for the limit, 10 dimes. And then you'd hear the clerk who was managing the book in the background, and he might say, tell him he can have 20. And the clerk would say, if you want, you could have 20 on that instead of 10. And my answer to the clerk always would be, I don't even want the original 10 now.
That's exactly what my reaction would be as well. Steve, hang on. I want you to explain your mantra coming up next. The mantra that's on your Twitter handle, which is @real_fats. You can't make a good bet a better bet by making a bad bet. Steve will explain that coming up next. I'm Scott Seidenberg. He's Steve Fats. Diano. This is the Look Ahead here on VSiN. Scott Seidenberg back here with you. This is the Look Ahead on VSiN, the sports betting network, rejoined by professional gambler and gambling expert, Steve Fats Diano. You can follow him on Twitter at just real_fats. And on your Twitter bio, Steve, you have your mantra there, which is, quote, you can't make a good bet a better bet by making a bad bet. Please explain that for the audience.
Okay, well, a good bet is a bet where you really beat the number pretty good. And a lot of times when somebody beats the number, like let's say they take 7 on a game and now the game's 4. Well, the initial reaction to most people is, oh, great, now I can lay back 4 and play a middle. And so now they had a bet at +7 and now they lay back 4. Well, if the game's 4 everywhere and painted 4, there's in and of itself, there's no value to laying 4 or taking 4. It's just you're just making a bet. It's a bad, by definition, it's a bad bet because you could bet it anywhere for as much as you want. So the fact that you took 7 doesn't all of a sudden make laying 4 better just because you have 7. What it actually does is it depreciates the value of your +7. So you can't make a good bet +7, a better bet by making a bad bet -4.
Is there an opportunity to ever make that a better bet, or the bet is just as good as it's going to get because you've completely beat the line?
Well, you want to keep there's now, if the game's 4 everywhere and now you find a 3 somewhere, there's nothing wrong with playing -3 to the other side, because in and of itself, -3 when the game's 4 would be a good bet. So you can make a good bet a better bet by making another good bet.
Yes.
But you can't make a good bet a better bet by making a bad bet. So basically, this is the term that most people that play middles, if anybody who middles uses this term, then the chances are they got a lot of money. They may be still making money middling, but they're letting a lot of money leak out the door. And that's when they use the term, I've got to close that game. And when they use the term, I've got to close that game, that means they already have so much on a certain side, and they've already decided they're buying back so much on the other side, no matter what the spread is, because it's still better than what they initially took. And instead of buying it back, they'd be better off if they just gambled on the original bet most of the time instead of buying it back. So when somebody says they've got to close a game, they're leaking money.
How long sometimes is the window of opportunity to grab a number? Like if you see a number that's out there that is off from the rest of the market, does that last long? Is it as soon as somebody hits it, it moves? Like, is it oftentimes a small window of opportunity?
It depends really on the location of where that is. For example, in the casinos, like the Vegas casinos, like that you see on Don Best or something like that, they tend to move slower. So if like a lot of the offshore market goes from 7 down to 6.5 and 6, you can probably, as the market's moving, if you can get a guy to you probably have time to still get a guy to a casino and still grab a 7 that's still sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to have somebody actually get there with the money to bet or have an account or whatever. So in that case, you're going to find, that's a case where you might find the better number. In a case of an injury, you got about 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds sometimes to jump. Like if you find out no LeBron James, well, you better already have your bookmaker on the phone or be logged into an account to bet when you get that information, because within 10 seconds, that game's going to be off the board and the line's going to be moved.
Yeah, which is why Twitter has become so valuable, but also, it can be ridiculous, like the movement that we saw in the NBA draft when Adrian Wojnarowski tweets out an incorrect take and all of a sudden manipulates the entire market of who's going to go number 1 overall, literally by the second. I'll tell you, I was hosting the night that he had tweeted out, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with what happened, but Woj, breaks the story that it's going to be Jabari Smith number 1 and, and Paolo not number 2 or whatever, or Paolo not number 1. And I'm on the air watching my computer screen. It was almost like watching the stock market and watching the lines just continue to move and move and move. It was one of the most surreal things I've ever experienced. And then, of course, the next day it becomes a retraction, and Paolo Banchero winds up being the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft. But the market fluctuation that occurred during the time I was live on the air, something like I've never seen before. And that's the power of social media.
Well, there was a situation similar to that on an NBA prop. I think it was Golden State. Somebody was coming back, and they weren't going to play them, but they were ceremonially going to start them. So they were going to play the first 5 seconds of the game,
Yep.
And then that's all they were going to play.
Yep.
And so when they tweeted out that they were going to do that, people buried all the props,
all the unders,
that player on the under, and then there was stories that then DraftKings threw a bunch of players out and claims to have lost millions on that prop. Now I don't know how they lost that much, because if they lost millions on that prop when that happened,
I think what happened was I think a lot of those books were paying out both sides, just as like a marketing thing, like to give it to the customers. That was when it was Klay Thompson's first game back, and Draymond Green had started ceremoniously and then exited the game after committing a foul on the opening tip-off, and everyone hammered all the unders on Draymond Green points, rebounds, assists, all that stuff. This was it was a big deal, and I think they wound up actually paying out both sides as a result.
Well, I believe they did that, but also they were saying the amount of money. I mean, you have a small window there to get down. So, I mean, you're talking about a prop. You're not talking about something that they're taking $20,000 a pop on.
Sure.
At DraftKings, they're what are they taking, a dime, 2 dimes at most, if they're taking that much? And then the number of people to have seen that and taken advantage of it,
mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, and if they were getting that much money down on it, then somebody in their trading departments, what's he just sitting there just watching the position pile up and not doing anything to adjust it? So, I mean, but that's a similar situation to the social media dictating a huge line move.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the power of it right now. I mean, this is the world that we live in here in 2022, the power of social media to move lines. CLV, one of the biggest topics of discussion in the sports betting game. When someone mentions to you closing line value, what's your reaction?
It's everything. It's all about having closing line value. Now, getting closing line value on every bet you make is not the easiest thing. I mean, if you're following sharp people who are always going to win, then you're going to bet, and then by the time the games start, your bet should usually be at a number that's better, at least by a half a point or a point, than what the closing line is. and in many cases could be 2 or 3 points if you're getting the right information, the right level of information. But I have an explanation. I don't know if I could do it within a minute here.
Well, that's fine. We can get to it. We can get to it coming up next. I'd love your thoughts on it and the explanation as to the importance of it. And I also want to ask you about buying points. There's a lot of people that are against it. There's a lot of people that are for it. Teasers, the same way. People talk about the traditional Wong teasers as the end-all, be-all, and non-traditional teasers they kind of scoff at. So I'd love to get your thoughts, the continuing thoughts on closing line value, buying points, and also your stance on teasers coming up next. He's Steve Fats Diano. You can follow him on Twitter at @real_Fats. I'm Scott Seidenberg. You hit me up on Twitter at ScottsOnAir, ScottsOnair. More of this fascinating discussion coming up next here on The Look Ahead on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Scott Seidenberg back here with you on The Look Ahead here on VSiN, rejoined by Steve Fats Diano, who you follow on Twitter at @real_Fats. And I want you to finish your thought that you were explaining about closing line value, why it is everything in terms of being successful in the sports betting game.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you an example of a challenge that, or not so much a challenge, but something I'm going to probably chart this year.
Okay.
Just as an example or an experiment of closing line value. But let's say you take, everybody says, oh, but you have to pick winners, blah, blah, blah. And I say, you don't have to pick winners. All you have to do is beat the line. So let's say you took 20 games and you just picked out of a hat each week to get your 20 selections. And now normally you should be 10-10. That's what you would expect picking 20 games out of a hat. Now, if a line mattered just 5% of the time, which would be 1 out of 20, then, and you beat the line by 1 point, the closing line by 1 point on every game, then you would be, at worst case, if one game, 1 out of 20, well, you'd be either 10-9-1 or you would be 11-9. Both are a small profit. So in order to prove that theory, I'm going to pick 20 games each week, and then I'm going to assign them 1 point better than whatever circa closes on the game. And then I'll post the results each week, and I'm predicting that the hat will do just as well as any handicapper that just picks winners.
But wouldn't the one come into play or be more valuable if it was around the key number? Like if it was around, if a game is lined up at 3 and you move it to 4, that's more valuable than if the game is at 22 and you move it to 23, like in college football or something like that.
Absolutely. That would be much stronger. So there's points that are going to be more stronger than others. But as a general sense, if you're sitting there all day and you're beating the number and you're getting the right number, you're going to beat the closing line in football by the end of the week. By the time you have your 20 best bets, you should beat the line by more than a point on every game. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that at a minimum, you're 1 out of those, you should be 10-10 by definition. And 1 out of that 20, that number should make a difference in 1 out of 20 games. And that should put you over the top.
That's interesting. When it comes to those key numbers, are you a proponent of buying points? So if you can,
absolutely,
if you can buy, let's say you buy a hook and it's only going to cost you 10 cents off of a 3 to 3.5, you would advise that you like buying the points.
We were on the market. Used to be able to buy a half a point on and off 3 in the NFL and go from 10 to a quarter.
15 cents, okay.
15 cents, an extra 5 cents over a normal half point buy. And then they went to 30 cents, and now most places charge an extra 25 cents. It's like 35 you have to go to.
Yeah.
But when it was, what we used to do is we used to take a game that was like either 2.5, 3, or 3.5. And if it was 3.5, we call up and bet plus 3.5 for 50,000. They'd move it to 3. Then they went to 3 and say, okay, now we'll lay back 2.5 minus a quarter for 50,000. And we would do that and we'd just play for the 3. And eventually they used to love writing it until they didn't love writing it anymore.
Yeah, until the games actually landed on 3.
Then they started going to 20 cents, and then eventually they're where they are now. It's ridiculous. So anytime you can find where you can take that extra half point across 3 and you're beating what that normal buy would be, absolutely, you take advantage of it.
Yeah, I love that. What about teasers? What's your stance on teasers? Are you more of a traditional Wong teaser guy, or will you go with a non-traditional teaser, let's say maybe even going across 0, which many people claim is a losing proposition?
Well, the big favorite of most people as teasers is they tease down below 2.5, so they get through the 7 and the 2.
Yep.
I like to always make sure I get down to minus a half on a lot of those. Although I will go to 1 or 1.5 on.
So
on
essentially getting a team at a pick'em.
Right, but there is an edge to be had on. Let's say a game is 3 minus 20 or 3 minus a quarter, so the book doesn't really want to move off the 3. Well, there's a spot where you can use a 6.5 point teaser and get to 3.5 the other side. Because really, at 3 minus a quarter, it's almost 3.5. So now you're teasing it using a 6.5 point teaser, and you're basically getting almost 7 points. So you're gaining value on that. And if you have like a couple teams that are -3, minus a quarter, and you put them together, well, now you're beating the value of the teaser.
That makes a lot of sense. And I want to repeat that because I want to make sure that people understand that. You know, when you are getting a side that's -3, but it's juiced at -120, you can go across 0, get the other side at +3.5, and it's the same juice essentially that you would be playing on the 3. It's different if it would be -3, -110, right? That's what we're getting at here.
Well, basically, when you play a teaser, the teaser doesn't recognize the juice on the actual one game.
It's just the point. Yeah.
3 minus a quarter is treated the same as if it was 3 flat. So when it's 3 minus a quarter, that -3 side is stronger. So now that's a good time to go off 3 across the way to +3.5 on the other side.
I like that.
You get the extra value of the 3 there.
I like that. Something I would definitely start to pay attention to. What about totals? Do you play a lot of totals? I mean, here in the preseason, we've seen, overs were 14-3 the first week of the preseason, including the Hall of Fame game. We had the first game here of week 2. I talked about the books adjusting to the overs, and I started betting some unders. The numbers have gone down, so obviously people have come in. Sharp money has come in on the unders. Do you monitor the totals market when it comes to these games?
Not in particular. I mean, if I've got somebody that gives me, good info or something on a particular game on the total, then I'm going to be all over that. I'm not going to just jump out. Okay, all the games went over. I know there's going to be the reverse bias and all that stuff's going to come into play. But I don't. Everybody's trying to do that. I try not to fight with the masses on stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let everybody have their fun and think they discovered plutonium.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still nice to, like as you mentioned, closing line value. There's no better feeling than betting a game and then seeing the number close at a price that is much different than what you have. Steve, this was a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for all the insight. Again, I love the mantra. You can't make a good bet a better bet by making a bad bet. So I love that. More sports bettors could learn from that mantra, and I do appreciate the insight, and I hope we do this again real soon.
Anytime, let me know. Happy to come back.
There he is, Steve Fats Diano. You can follow him on Twitter at real_Fats. Professional gambling expert, just has a wealth of knowledge and has been in the game for a very, very long time. The experiences that he's had, the groups that he has worked with, some of the legends in this game. So we appreciate his time and his insight and giving us the information here on VSiN.